At top is actual photograph of John Brown's fort at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. The original site of the historic building is marked by a granite shaft. At the bottom is the home occupied by John Brown at Harper's Ferry prior to the historic riots and acts of high treason and conspiracy for which he was convicted and hanged. That's United States claiming high treason and conspiracy for supposedly trying to free the slaves. In 1859, John Brown and his followers faced trial here for treason, freedom, liberty. Those were the watchwords in 1859. John Brown and his followers sought to free the quote-unquote slaves in his day, and he seized a United States arsenal at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. John Brown and his followers were tried here in a quaint little old courthouse and hanged in the courthouse yard. The school kids sing about they hung John Brown on a South apple tree. But how many knew the details of the trial, conviction, and hanging of John Brown in Charlestown? News of the attack on Harper's Ferry was flashed throughout the nation. I repeat, news of the attack on Harper's Ferry was flashed throughout the nation. The Virginia militia came, and Governor Wise of Virginia took personal charge. After a 3-day fight, the little army was captured. Its leader was recognized as John Brown. Brown and his followers were taken to Charlestown, where the grand jury was in session. The old Virginia law required 5 days lapse between the preliminary examination and the submission of the case to the grand jury. A whole nation was wrought up to the tensant pitch during those 5 days of suspense. It was rumored everywhere, particularly in Virginia and through the South, that John Brown's little army of 20 men was but the forerunner of a mighty army from the North to come down and free the slaves, and that a powerful secret organization was planning revolt by riot and murder, and the Brown gang was to be released from jail. The courtroom was jammed with 500 or 600 people. 8 justices of the peace conducted the preliminary hearing. They constituted the court of first resort. Upon their say-so would depend whether John Brown, a vowed abolitionist, should be set free with his comrades, or whether they should be held for the grand jury. Among the town's citizens who were taken prisoner by Brown was Colonel Lewis W. Washington, grandnephew of George Washington. The casualties of John Brown's Harper's Ferry killed were 12. 2 of Brown's sons were killed. So-called damaging literature introduced as evidence at the Browns' trial were copies of the Constitution and ordinances drawn up by John Brown for the reconstruction of the Constitution of the United States through amendment and appeal. Letters from Joshua R. Giddings, member of Congress from Ohio, and abolitionists were a part of the evidence. The court imposed the sentence that he should be taken to a place of execution on December 2nd, 1859, and there be hanged by the neck by the sheriff until dead. Then on December 2nd, John Brown was taken 5 blocks away to a field where a scaffold had been erected. He looked with interest upon the many soldiers about. He walked upon the gallows. The black cap was adjusted, and soon he began the great adventure. On December 16, 4 Brown followers named Cook, Green, Copy, and Copeland were executed in Charlestown. The town was named in honor of Charles Washington, brother of George Washington. Many descendants of the Washington family still live here. So I have a few questions from this reading. My first question is, the news spread all around about what happened. So why didn't any of these quote-unquote slaves come and help John Brown if he was going to die for their so-called slavery? 5-day trial, and the news spread all around, and didn't nobody come help John Brown, and his 2 sons even died for this. Why didn't the so-called slaves assist John Brown? Why did they sit back and be passive? Some of the images show that he was kissing little babies before he went and got hung, but they just sat there and watched him get hung. George Washington and his family came up a lot in this reading. So another question I have is, why in these days and times do the ones who identify as the descendants of slaves, like the women, why do they sit there and strip their clothes off and strip to pieces of paper with George Washington's face on it? Is that how you repay John Brown and his 2 sons that are supposed to have died trying to free you? Does that make sense to you? I wanted to add as well that most of the abolitionists, quote unquote, are the ones who really found out either their grandmothers or their great-grandmothers were actually of Asiatic descent or melanated skin. A good example of this is the demonstration we have on Robert Purvis, who found out that his mother was of Moorish descent in the Americas, and he went on to help establish what was known as the Underground Railroad. But the Underground Railroad and escaping to the north was indeed a trap as well. And we have the resolution right here. Resolved that we endorse the Emancipation Proclamation of September and January last and believe they will have a solitary effect in weakening the enemy and depriving him of one of his greatest elements of strength in carrying on the rebellion. Resolved that all property of rebels and traitors, whether slaves or other property, ought to be confiscated, and our government should take it whether found. What's modernly known as Canada is really Canaan land, but to the European colonizers, it was known as the Great Bulwark, which is known as the Wall. So everyone sit there and try to escape to the north, and they ran into the arms and the nets of those that was trying to extend the slave states, known as the Golden Circle. Now, as far as it's saying John Brown was trying to change the Constitution, he was in error there. The Constitution was not needed to be changed because within the Constitution holds the right to secure your nationality and to secure your independence. Nationality specifically. You call yourself colorable people, white or black, you're stateless. And whatever you think is your property is in fact not your property because you're deemed as property. You got to have nationality and independence, which we already have the demonstrations and readings from the resolutions from that time, them saying the South demands nationality and independence, and they was fighting specifically against those of the North trying to come down and extend the slave states, even unto Havana, Cuba, even down to South America. What just came to mind, though, was why was the children singing that he was hung from a apple tree, but then it said he was hung from the gallows, you know? The reason this whole demonstration came about, I was speaking with the Moorish brother on the phone, and he was like, brother, you're like the modern day John Brown. So I wanted to go see what this man was all about. But I'm starting to see he may have been in error. For one, he died and both of his sons died for a lost cause. Because in these days and times, the ones that they say he died for, the ones claiming to be the descendants of these slaves so-called, you go on the internet, you see they're pushing nothing but alcoholism, addiction, all of their songs about murder, sexualization, and just hatred. Just degrading acts that they're doing, not honoring anything that these people were supposed to have died for. They're in worse conditions. They're putting their very value on food, clothing, shelter, on pieces of paper with the image of the same one that they're crying about enslaved them. Another good example is when they was demanding that segregation be voided so that they could go into the European schools, the European restaurants and stores. You look on the internet today, these descendants be in European schools telling the teachers to shut the F up. They're going into the stores, robbing, taking whatever they want. They're going into the restaurants, yelling at the cooks and the servers, spitting on them, throwing stuff, man. It's crazy. Like you beg for all this stuff, and when you got it, you have made no kind of upgrades. I must close out with the divine warning to the nations by Prophet Noble Drew Ali. This is an excerpt. In their present condition of their environment, in which they themselves try to force upon a civilized world, they will not refrain from their sinful ways of action, and their deeds have brought Jim Crowism, segregation, and everything that brings harm to human beings on earth. And they fought the Southerner for all these great misuses. But I have traveled in the South and have examined conditions there, and it is the works of my people continuously practicing the things which bring dishonor, disgrace, and disrespect to any nation that lives the life. And I am hereby calling on all true American citizens for moral support and finance to help me in my great missionary work to bring my people out of darkness into marvelous light. Prophet Noble Drew Ali. I leave you in love and peace.